Today's gospel reading is a very difficult one to understand. It's very different from the way Jesus usually speaks. I've come to bring division, he says. That sounds strange, because at Christmas, one of the titles for the baby born, Jesus, is the Prince of Peace. And now we talk about him, he says, I've come to bring division, 3 against 2 in the family. Oh, that sounds really strange. Why do I want to follow a God that brings division into my family? And so I'd like to invite you in the next few minutes to please pay attention. This is worth understanding. We need to spend some time to really break down what Jesus talks today so that we understand why that division is not only intended, but it is necessary. So is Jesus very divisive? Yes, he is. And I'm sure some of you are already experiencing that in your own lives. So there was a survey that was carried out in 2008, so that's quite a while ago. And it was a survey among 1,500 workers in the US. And the question for that survey was, what is the one issue that is off the table or off discussion at the workplace? And guess what it is? Religion. And then the second was politics. Don't talk about religion. Don't talk about religion. I'll find ourselves even doing that now when we have our family gatherings. We can't talk about religion. Not only is talking about religion very divisive, the biggest thing that causes the division is the decision to follow Jesus. The decision itself divides families. So whether you talk about it or not, the fact that you decide to follow Jesus brings division in a home. And if it unites your own family, praise God. How lucky you are. I didn't experience that in my own life. I told you my own story. When I told my dad I was going to become a priest, that's it. No. I never had a relationship with him after that. Is it worth this risk? Yes, it is. Do you want a father's love in your life? Yes, you do. But what comes first? Eternal life, right? So why it's a decision to follow Jesus? Why does that trouble some people? Why is that a problem? And I'll tell you why it is this morning. Because the decision to follow Jesus entails a change in direction. This is where the problem is. This is why it upsets people. This is why it unsettles families. Because you're all going as a family to this direction, towards this direction, and suddenly one of you chooses to become a Christian and he starts behaving differently. Is Phil here this morning? Yeah, sorry, I have to point you out. I'm sure when you decided to become a Christian, you know what I'm talking about. Yes. Some of us are so lucky we're born into Christian homes and we have no idea of what persecution looks like. And the greatest persecution we have is that we get to come to church on Sunday. And everyone in our home is Catholic. Well, that's very easy. It's not the same for everyone, I tell you. The decision to follow Jesus entails a change in direction. And so if you find yourself practicing a religion where everyone is comfortable with you, even though they don't go to church, it's because, and I'm going to use these strong words, it's because your decision to follow Jesus is not a watershed moment. So what is a watershed moment? How do you define what a watershed is, a watershed moment is? I looked it up in the dictionary and it says, watershed moment is a drainage that collects water and divides it and determines the direction the bodies of water go. So it collects it in a drainage and now decides the water is going to, some will go right, another bodies of water will go left. That is called a watershed moment. And the Saskatchewan River is a very good example of a watershed moment. Collecting water, bodies of water from different sources and deciding which direction this water is going to go. Another way to understand clearly what a watershed moment is, because that's what has happened to us. A watershed moment, another way to define it, is an important event that changes the direction of history. And a very good example I can give is what happened 1435. I don't think anyone was born then, thank God. 1435, what happened? That was when the printing press was invented. Watershed moment. Imagine if the printing press was not invented, you would not have this. That was a watershed moment. Watershed moment that is very common that we know is when the cell phone was invented. And you can say, well, it's come with all its challenges, but it's also come with so much good. That is a watershed moment for a Christian. And I just want those of you who are RCIA, probably this makes sense to you. Oh, sorry, those of you who went through the RCIA program, probably that this makes more sense to you than those who were baptized as infants. So for an adult who is becoming a Catholic, we see that on Easter Vigil night. And vigil is night. And he or she stands at the back there with a priest and people watching, and he goes into a fountain, and he comes back a different person. He goes into the water 3 times, and he comes back different. That is a watershed moment. Because what has happened in the life of that adult who went into that fountain is he or she has decided that going forward, my life is going to be collected into a drainage that Jesus is in control of, and I yield the control of my life to him. I fall into this drainage. He collects all the bodies of people who have made a watershed decision, and now going forward, he decides for me how to live my life. That is a problem. Because like I said earlier on, if everyone is going left in your family, as soon as you make a watershed decision to follow Jesus, you're going to go right. And that is a problem. Because oftentimes the direction Jesus takes you is very contrary to the direction the world is going. We see that very clearly. And so I know I'm repeating myself, if you find yourself going the direction of the world, then you probably want to check your decision whether it is watershed. And I hear we have all kinds of reasons for doing that. We make a watershed decision, and yet we don't yield control to Jesus because, according to us, I just don't want to offend people. And my response is, well, if I ask you to give me $1,000 box, $1,000, I say, give me $1,000, you wouldn't say because you don't want to offend me, you hand me $1,000. You rather offend me. So where do you think I'm going to get that money from? I'm not a bank. I can't give that to you. And then you walk away. You don't care whether I'm offended or not. But when it comes to decision with Jesus, sometimes we think we're smart. We make excuses like, I just don't want to offend. And what's the option there is that my decision is not watershed. It's not Jesus that decides my direction. It's someone else who hasn't chosen Jesus. Yet, as difficult as this is, and I'm not saying this is easy, right? To be in a group of people and be different. That's not easy. Almost flowing, like Christians today, we are called to flow against the tide. That's tiring. But as difficult as that decision is, it's a wise investment. I like the way Jesus puts it in the Gospel of Luke chapter 12. He says, when you see the clouds beginning to form in the west, what do you say? Here comes the rain. And you are right, because it's about to rain. He says, but you fools, you know how to interpret the weather, but you do not know how to interpret the present times. Remember, the point I just made is as challenging as it is to make a watershed decision where you collect the whole of your life and you give it to Jesus and he determines the direction. And people will not like you for it, yet it's a wise decision. Because Jesus puts it here. If you know how to, I like this English saying. Those of you who have been to England, you probably heard this. It's a very common saying in England. It says, if you don't like the weather, just wait 5 minutes. And that's true. If you've been to England, and you come out and you don't like the weather, honestly, 5 minutes is going to change. But what Jesus is saying here, the point he's making is, if you are so smart, if we're so smart and we can analyze the weather, and because we know what's coming, we make the decision on how to dress appropriately to protect ourselves. He says, how come we cannot interpret what is coming to our lives and order our lives in such a way that we're not taken by surprise? What he's practically saying is, get your life in order. And that's what he's saying to me. Get your life in order. And so the decision to follow Jesus, because it's so important, it cannot be postponed. When I wrote this point, I said, I'm sure Jesus, you're talking to me. You know how many times I've postponed certain decisions in my life that is life-changing, altering? I'm saying, Lord, you know what? I'm only 55. I think I have another 25 years to live. Come back, check with me next 20 years, and I'll tell you whether I'm ready for that. As if 20 years, I think 20 years is eternity. It's going to come. Oh yeah, Lord, I think I still have, we just keep postponing. But the truth is, this watershed decision is not something that can be postponed. I read about this kidnapper by name Ariel Castro. He had abducted 3 girls with a span of 10 years, if you remember that story, in the US. And he kept them in this place that no one could find them. Actually, fathered a child with some of them. And when he was eventually caught after 10 years, he knew that if he let the case go through the jury, it was going to be a death penalty. So what did he do? He negotiated a plea bargain. And the plea bargain meant he was going to spend 1,000 years, which is not possible. So he was going to remain in the prison for the rest of his life. Oftentimes when we hear people negotiate plea bargains, it's not because they are trying to save money or save time. It's because they know the decision that will come, the alternative is undesirable. And so they want to cut their losses. I know what is going to come. It's a death penalty. So it's better I stay in the prison for the rest of my life. And when I talk about a watershed decision for Jesus, not something that can be postponed, I'm sure right now in your mind, as it is in my mind, we think we can skip the court date with God. We think when we appear before God in judgment, we can say to him, not guilty by reason of insanity. I just want to tell you bad news this morning. That won't fly in God's courtroom. We are all guilty, including this guy talking right now, because we are sinners. And the only way to avoid conviction that leads to death, there's only one way. And guess what that way is? Is to run to the mercy of God and hide under the works of Jesus. Pleading not guilty is not going to fly. There is no such thing as a plea bargain when it comes to being in the courtroom of God. We're all guilty. And the only way not to be punished forever is that we accept the work of Jesus. We cover ourselves under that work. We experience his mercy. And his Father finally looks at us with eyes of love. This is why a watershed decision for Jesus cannot and should not be postponed. Shall we bow our heads in prayer?